Testing. Everybody got quiet. Can you hear me? Okay, we have a blessing with the liquid sunshine, so we waited a couple minutes beyond the 10 o'clock start time, and we're still expecting some more folks. So there's a van that's running around we're expecting, and some motorcycles. So assuming they show with the weather, we'll just fold them into the group. So anyway, we're gonna start the program, and I just really sincerely appreciate all you folks coming out in the weather that we have and the rain and all that. So I'm going to officially welcome you, and then we're going to run through a little routine, and then we're going to hand the program over to Porter Halliburton, and we're just blessed and so appreciative of he and Marty coming up here and doing a program for us and with us. So most of you in the audience know about Commander Porter Halliburton, and we'll get into that here in a second. So I'm Bill Sugarts, just to introduce you. I'm Bill Sugarts, and I'm co-founder of the Fawn Lake Veterans Group, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served in 1969-70 with the 23rd Infantry, known as the Americal, and had the good fortune to be back to Vietnam, to go back to Vietnam doing work with other veterans on unexploded ordnance. So in that time frame, I had the privilege and the honor to visit the Hanoi Hilton and the complex that's still there. It's way less, it's way smaller than when Porter was there. But anyway, we somehow got hold of Porter's Naval Institute talk, and some of you in the Fawn Lake Veterans Group, Mark had sent that out, and we were so convicted by it, and I was personally convicted by it because I had been to the prison and seen that, and being a combat veteran and that sort of thing. So anyway, the bottom line was, like I do many times, I reached out, and the ask is I emailed Porter, and Marty joined. Marty's his wife, and business manager, and she's in her own right has her own career and is very accomplished as Porter is. So anyway, that's how this came together, and Mark and I and the Fawn Lake Veterans Group decided to put the event together, and we were looking for a location that had an opportunity like this, a nice setting, and an opportunity to do a video and streaming, so this is it. So anyway, that's the background, and I just say welcome, and we're glad you're here, sincerely glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Rob of the Wilderness Church and let him welcome you. Pastor Rob.
Thank you so much, Bill. I want to welcome you to Wilderness Community Church. My name is Pastor Rob Almy. I have the distinct pleasure to serve as the pastor here. We are delighted that you are here with us this morning. We are delighted to hold this event. I want to let you know two really important things, and that is where to find the restroom and where to find coffee. They're not distinct from each other. The restrooms are located right outside the doors here and to the left. If you need to avail yourself of those, you can find the refreshments outside the door and into the Welcome Center and
thank you that we can gather here this morning to hear a story of resiliency, to hear a story of your protection, of your care. And Lord, probably most of us don't understand what that is and how deep the suffering can be. However, Lord, you have the power to overcome that. Your love and your grace can overwhelm our lives and give us the hope and the joy and the freedom of our heart, because, Lord, this world is a temporary place. But Father, you, as creator and sustainer of our universe, of everything there is and ever will be, Lord, you have the power to overcome any conflict in our minds or in our hearts or in our lives. And Lord, we pray for your love and your compassion to be upon us this morning. Lord, I thank you for Porter and Marty as they've come all the way up here to Wilderness Church to share a piece of their life and, Lord, how you get them through it. Lord, we thank you. We praise you in your holy name. Amen.
James, start the video, please.
Good morning. This is the day the history books will record as the day they signed the Agreement on Ending the War and Restoring Peace in Vietnam. That is the official title, and this is Saturday, January 27th, 1973.
Yesterday marked 50 years since the Paris Peace Accords were signed, an agreement that formally ended the Vietnam War. Much has changed since then, but half a century later, some stories remain untold, including the experience of Porter Halliburton, a POW held for more than 7 years. At the age of 83 now, Halliburton has written Reflections on Captivity, an incredibly powerful book from the man who was supposed to be dead. So this is it.
Yeah.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, Porter Halliburton looks down on his tombstone. In memory of Porter Alexander Halliburton, killed in combat over North Vietnam. But you weren't.
I weren't.
Halliburton's plane was shot down over North Vietnam in 1965. While on his 76th mission, the government listed him as killed in action. What no one knew is that he was able to eject.
I didn't know that I was supposed to be dead. I found out I was dead roughly the same time that Marty found out I was alive.
Halliburton left for Vietnam when his daughter was only 5 days old. It would be 16 months before his wife Marty learned he was a prisoner of war.
When you were first captured, did you think you were going to be tortured, killed? What did you think?
I didn't know. It was all so uncertain. And so I was determined to try and survive for my family, mostly. And if I had been a bachelor, I don't know what I would have done, whether I would have ridden the plane in with the pilot.
You think you would have sacrificed yourself, died?
Rather than become a prisoner and face whatever. I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know how bad.
One public incident was the forced march of POWs through Hanoi in front of crowds who threw objects and yelled. But it was far worse in isolation, where Halliburton was shackled and tortured. To communicate, the prisoners practiced something called tap code.
The word was, we may not be able to talk, so here's a code that we can use to tap between the walls.
How would you, like if you're going to say hi to me, how would you tap that?
I would tap 2 taps, which means the second row down on this matrix of 5 by 5, and then 3 taps over to the letter H. And then I would tap 2 taps and 4 taps over to the letter I.
You said the reason why you were able to be so effective, whether it was tap code or other things, is it because the Vietnamese didn't understand American culture and American humor?
We found that that was a weapon that we could use, was their ignorance of a lot of American things. They didn't know what a middle finger meant, and so we used that anytime there were cameras.
They had to figure it out at some point.
Well, they did, and I think it must have been some Chinese or Russian that, was looking at pictures that they had taken, and they said, do you know what these guys are doing to you?
When he continually refused to divulge information, the North Vietnamese finally did something they thought would break him. Paired him up with a black prisoner.
That was their idea of a worse place to put me in, a young Southern white boy.
They thought that race relations were so bad in the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
that pairing you up, a white man with a black man, was going to be disaster.
Well, and then telling me that I had to be his servant, I had to be his caregiver, I had to do everything for him.
Which is something that you embraced.
I did.
Halliburton and fellow prisoner Fred Sherry became lifelong best friends. Their story was the subject of the book, Two Souls, Indivisible.
Fred Cherry is here. This is right after the book came out in 2004, and this is Jim Hirsch, the author.
Lieutenant Colonel Cherry.
Cherry died in 2016. Both he and Halliburton survived in Vietnam by accepting the physical pain and changing their mental outlook.
I was on an emotional roller coaster, and at some point I said, there's nothing I can do to get home any earlier than when it happens. And so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to worry about what I can. And so I developed what I called long-term, non-specific optimism.
Long-term, non-specific optimism.
Right. I'm going home sometime, but I ain't worrying about when it is.
When Halliburton was finally released, shortly after the Paris Peace Accords were signed, it was front-page news.
570 Americans captured by the Vietnamese communists in almost a decade of war have now been freed.
Halliburton returned to Vietnam 25 years later with Marty. Neither had any idea what to expect.
The people of Vietnam, I didn't want them to know who I was. I didn't want them to know I was an American. And so I finally had to say that I was American. And they said, America #1, and they put their thumb up.
Marty Halliburton ended up making frequent trips back and even began teaching English as a second language classes to Vietnamese. Today in Greensboro, beyond writing Reflections on Captivity, Porter Halliburton has a book of poetry coming out. But none of those words, as good as they are as profound as the ones on a piece of stone that Halliburton visits from time to time, the reminder of his death that never was.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Great. Yeah. You want to move that microphone? Wow. First of all, I want to say how grateful I am to be here, to have such a welcome and to see so many veterans here. I thank you all for your service. I brought this hat today because of the affection that I have for the Marine Corps, part of naval service. And so the hat represents my first cousin, William D. Halliburton, who was a Navy pharmacist mate, second class, and he was with the 3rd Marines at Okinawa, and he was killed trying to rescue and care for a wounded Marine, and was posthumously given the Medal of Honor. Been many things that have been named for him. The USS Halliburton is one of them. It's now been retired after 30 years of service, and we hope that it is going to be the first post-World War II museum ship in Erie, Pennsylvania. And we're getting close to that. So anyway, I just wanted to remind you of that. First of all, I want to thank Bill and Walt and everybody who's involved in putting this together. This has been incredible effort, and I'm glad to see so many people who come out. You've seen my wife Marty, who is here, and you've seen a lot of what I was going to say today, but I do want to say that the reason that I talk about this experience is really because of what I've learned from it. I don't think any experience is worth talking about unless you learn something from it, other than just entertainment. And so I learned some very important things that helped in my survival. But 2 or 3 of them have remained with me throughout my life and guide my life today. And I learned the first one very early in my captivity, and I learned the last one very late in my captivity. And those 2 things will come together as we go along. And so I will begin with our story. Marty and I were married in December of 1963. I was still in Navy pre-flight. Marty was still a student at Queens College, and so we got married right before Christmas. And I finished up my training there. I had gone to Sewanee Military Academy, and I know there's someone that has a connection there with Sewanee Military Academy. And I graduated from Davidson College in 1963. I enlisted because I had not gone to ROTC, and so I had a fraternity brother who talked about how wonderful the F-4 Phantom was, and I decided that's what I wanted to do in the Navy, and so I enlisted, and I went to pre-flight in Pensacola in October. And then Marty and I were married, and 2 years after that, just as I finished up the RAG in Key West, Florida, I was on my way to join BF 84, and my daughter was born, and I turned around, came back, and I had the joy of seeing her for 5 days before I went on to Oceana, Virginia, and Norfolk, where I joined my squadron, BF 84. We were flying the F-4B Phantom. I was the RIO in that squadron. And so we trained there for a different mission. The Phantom was an air-to-air weapon, and I was trained to fire the missiles, get us into position to fire against the enemy aircraft. And of course, in Vietnam, we were going to do a great deal more than that. And so we were training for kind of new missions. And this is the USS Independence. It was an East Coast carrier, the first East Coast carrier to go to Vietnam. And so it took us about a month, the month of May, to get to Vietnam. And so we arrived in the summer of 1965, and we started off in what we called Dixie Station, which is flying off of a geographic point in the water here, just to kind of warm up, and we were under the command or the control of Air Force forward air controllers, and they were pointing out targets, and we would drop bombs and things. And then after that, we would move up to Yankee Station, which is up here, and started missions against North Vietnam. And so I flew about 75 missions. I was with Lieutenant Commander Stan Olmsted, who I thought was the best pilot in our squadron, and I was fortunate to fly many missions with Stan, and we were together on the day that our squadron, our air wing actually was assigned an Alpha target, and this was one of the major targets that President Johnson and McNamara kept, and we could not attack these targets without their permission. And so finally we got permission to do that. Could someone run a bottle of water up here? I would appreciate it. And so, thanks so much. We were finally assigned a mission that we felt was worthwhile. We had been 2 line periods there, 45 days, and mostly our overall mission was to stop the flow of materiel going into South Vietnam via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was it. And so we were bombing little bridges. We were we were looking for trucks loaded going through North Vietnam to the Ho Chi Minh Trail and so on. Never saw a truck, and little bridges were rebuilt very quickly, and so I was kind of discouraged by the end of those 2 periods, and we were just coming back from Japan and got this mission, which I thought, oh, at last we are going to be doing something worthwhile, because the target was, if you can go back to the map a minute, the target was up, and it's hard to see, but we were here, we moved up, we flew 35 airplanes around here to Tai Nguyen, which is up here, industrial city, and it also crossed the river with the rail and road bridge, which is a major communications link between China and Vietnam. And so that was our target, and we were about over 30 planes that were involved in this. And so we were towards the end of that flight, and Stan and I got hit by anti-aircraft fire and took a hit right in the front cockpit. And Stan was killed immediately, and my mask was blown off, everything, the holes in the canopy, and I had only a few seconds in order to decide to eject and into an unknown environment, an unknown future. And so that feeling of pulling that ejection handle, I knew that I was either going to die or this was going to be a very different experience. And so it was, So I wound up at Hoa Lo Prison, which was built by the French during the colonial period to hold Vietnamese prisoners. And the circle, I mean, there were many areas to this, and there was this area here was called Little Vegas. This was New Guy Village. This became Camp Unity here. These were big rooms that held maybe 40 people each all around here. And this little compound there was Heartbreak Hotel. And that was my first place I was held. And Hoa Lo really means the furnace, and it's a different meaning, but it really described what this place was sort of like. And Heartbreak Hotel, this is a cell that I was first in, cell number 2. There were 8 cells. One was used, cell number 8 was used for a washroom and so on. And the others were full of people who had been shot down on this mission. Our airplane was not the only one. There were 3 airplanes that were shot down. There were 4 of us who were captured, POWs. There were 2 pilots that were killed. There were 2 guys that had been sent in a RA-5C recce plane. They'd been shot down the day before, and so they were there. And so this was the worst 2 days of the USS Independence and Air Wing 7. We lost 5 aircraft, 6 POWs, 2 pilots were killed. And so there was confusion that day because another VF-84 airplane was hit about the same time we were. They were on the radio, we were hit, fire warning lights were turning back and all of that, and right after they said that, our airplane flew into the side of a mountain and blew up, spectacular. Everybody thought it was the other airplane, and nobody saw my chute. My mask was gone, so I had no microphone. None of my radios worked. Nobody saw anything, and so that's when I was declared killed. And so I didn't know that, but so we're in heartbreak, and a few days later, I saw a man, they loaded him out of a Jeep, and he was on crutches and casts and everything, and moved into cell number 3, which is right next to me, and that was Jim Stockdale, Commander Jim Stockdale. And he was a senior naval officer throughout our experience and one of our great leaders, and I'm sure you've heard a great deal about Jim Stockdale, a Medal of Honor winner for his actions there, and one of our really significant leaders. And let me describe a little bit about the environment here. The Vietnamese never treated us as POWs. We were treated as criminals and had no rights whatsoever. We had nothing except what they gave us, a meager, couple of pairs of pajamas and tin cup and some straw mat and so on. And so the environment really, they wanted to control us completely. They wanted to cut us off from any kind of leadership or anything like that. And so isolation was one of the big things that they tried to do, to keep everybody separate. And so to control us. And they used fear and indoctrination. They did not do brainwashing. They were not that sophisticated, but they certainly wanted to indoctrinate us to their view of the war and what we should do and not do. And they had rules, and there were punishments for those rules. They used humiliation, inactivity, and later extreme physical violence. I mean, in the beginning, it was a lot of beatings and slaps and spent a long time in those leg irons and so on. So that was the environment that we had to deal with. And we were fortunate in having the leaders that we had who assessed that situation and really set us on the right path of resistance and escape. I did not bring. Well, let me just say that I wrote poetry while I was there, and because I was an English major in college, and that was something that I enjoyed doing. I'd been doing that for since high school, and let me just find it. And the first one that I wrote there was called Winter Crypt, and it was really an attempt to describe what we were going through, and our situation. If I can find it in this book, it is here, I know. How can I describe the way that I feel? As if the stream I was crossing had suddenly frozen and locked my ankles in an icy grip, immobilizing that once fluid force, and I with it. And so we thought at the time that we were not going to be there long. We were mostly pretty optimistic that the war, the air war, the Vietnamese would not be able to resist this incredible firepower that we were putting on them. And so we were optimistic, and I soon realized that we had a lot more to do than wait it out. And so I learned right away this first enduring lesson that we were in the hands of a captor who could take away every freedom that we enjoy. And they did. Sometimes we were completely immobilized, completely isolated from anything. And yet we realized that there was one thing they could not take away from us, and that was our free will, our ability to choose how we were going to react to any situation, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how terrible or terrifying it was. We could choose how to react to that in spite of the circumstances. My good friend Mike McGrath, who was there for 6 years, Naval Academy graduate, also a wonderful artist, drew these pictures of life in Hanoi, and this is one of them, and just shows that we could be in this kind of a position for literally days or longer, just leaving us there with no ability to do anything except choose how we were going to react to this situation. And that was the great lesson. And so this lesson came home to me in a very dramatic way. I had been told that I was abiding by the code of conduct, name, rank, service number, date of birth, nothing more, because that's what we've been taught. And yet something happened. So I was told after about 2 weeks of interrogation and all of this, slaps and, leg irons and everything, that if you continue to refuse to talk to us, we're going to move you to a worse place. Well, I'd never been in a worse place than this. I couldn't imagine a worse place. And they said, if you talk to us, we'll move you to a better place. And you'll be with your friends, you'll have better food, and you'll play games and get letters from home and write letters and all of these wonderful things. And so I was I was not about to cave in to that kind of promise. I didn't believe that it existed, and so I said no, and I moved to a worse place. Now, I won't describe each one of them, but there were 3 more. Every time I had to make a choice, better place, worse place. And every time I chose the worst place. And then I wound up in, I think, the worst place they had. It was a shed used to store coal and other filthy things. And it was infested with rats and mosquitoes and flies and everything. And by this time, I was physically getting worn down because I couldn't eat I couldn't eat the food that they left outside the door for hours because the ants and the rats and everything had already eaten most of it. I was sick. I was in isolation. I couldn't tap on the wall to anybody. Now, isolation is different than solitary confinement. In solitary confinement, as we defined it, you could communicate with others, tapping on the wall or other means. In isolation, you do not have that communication with anybody else, and I can tell you that that's a very different environment, and it does crazy things with your mind over time. So much so that I have had some fellow POWs who spent much longer time in isolation than I did say that if I was given the choice of torture or isolation over a long period of time, I'd take torture. So that indicates, how awful isolation is. And so this was why we made such an effort to communicate with each other through the tap code and any other way that we could do that. And so the last choice that I was given when I was in this terrible, awful, filthy place, better place or a worse place. And it was the hardest decision I ever made in my life because I could see no good end either way. I knew I could not survive this place, much less a worse place. And so that's when I was put in with this black man, a black Air Force major, Fred Cherry. And he was very, very badly injured. He was a 105 pilot, blew the canopy to clear the smoke after he'd been hit at low level, doing about 600 knots. And his arm got in the slipstream, and it just about ripped his arm off his body. And when he ejected, he had a broken foot. He had many, many other injuries and everything. And so I was told, you must care for Cherry. And so that was their idea of putting a young Southern white boy in with a black, particularly an Air Force. Couldn't have been Navy. It had to be Air Force anyway. So their plan did not work. From my point of view, I was given something important to do rather than what I had been doing before, which was surviving, resisting, and preparing to go home and stay healthy. Nothing else. And communicating, that was part of our duty. But now I had something important to do. And that changed my whole outlook on captivity. That we had to look after each other. We had to care for each other. One of the ways we did that was by communication. We never wanted anybody to be in isolation, to be out of contact with friendly people, and to receive the news as it was, the advice that we got from our leaders and so on. And so this was a revelation to me. And instead of being the worst thing, it was the best thing they could have done. And Fred, and as the video said, Fred and I became lifelong friends. And his injuries at the beginning were not the worst part. It was that the Vietnamese thought at one point that they might send him home as a gesture, of how humane they were and everything. And so they decided they were going to operate on his shoulder, put it back. And of course, they did not have anything like the medical expertise in order to do that. And so it was from this operation and his lack of care, infection, and everything else that nearly killed him several times over this. So that was the challenge of staying alive. He was a hero in Korea, flew many missions there. He was the first black to be captured there and the most senior, and a great leader and a true American patriot. It was my honor to be with him and to learn from him. And of course, Jim Hirsch wrote in Two Souls Indivisible about our experience. I lived with him for 8 months, and then you saw the Hanoi March, and that was right after the Hanoi March is when they separated us, and we went back into solitary confinement. I moved out to a very bad place in the country. Well, it was leadership that really was one of the things that helped us to survive. And the three that I mentioned here, Colonel Robert Reisner, who was flew in World War II in Korea and now in Vietnam. He was just amazing guy. He was a senior officer there for many years. And of course, Jim Stockdale was a senior naval officer, and his classmate at the Naval Academy was Jeremiah Denton. You might remember Jerry Denton was filmed supposedly giving an account that he opposed the war and our government and everything. He did not say that, even though he had been tortured for a long time to have him say that, and he did not. He made a choice. He made a choice. He also made another choice that you might know about. He used Morse code. He was a very smart guy. Most of us didn't know Morse code beyond SOS, but he did. And he used blinking his eyes to send the word torture. To send the word torture, the intelligence that we were being tortured. And so this was the first time that there was any really sort of official news that that's what the Vietnamese were doing. And so there were other senior leaders as well. These are the ones that I had most contact with and were influenced by. But soon, these senior leaders were isolated from us as much as they could. They put them back in the Hanoi Hilton in Heartbreak Hotel, and really tried to prevent them from communicating with each other. It's another story about innovation of how they did communicate. I'll leave that for later. Reisner and Jerry Denton, I think you needed to have faith in something, because without faith you don't have hope, and without hope you have despair. And so I think everybody had faith in something. And of course, Jerry and Robbie were both devout Christians. Stockdale was not, but he had faith in Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, the Enchiridion. He had studied this, and so that was the strength that he drew, was a Stoic philosophy and approach to life. And so everybody had to hang on to something. But these guys were eventually put in sort of isolation, and it was left to the mid-grade officers who were the senior ones in a cell block or a group in which you could communicate. And these were what we call senior ranking officers, SROs. And I could talk a lot about them. They were great leaders in their own, because they were the senior people on a day-to-day basis. And the one that I admired the most was Bob Purcell, Air Force captain, great guy. Anyway, I could tell you lots and lots of stories about Percy. He had leadership skills that were hard to define, but he could say no to the Vietnamese and they almost accepted it. Whereas the rest of them, we say no and you get knocked around. But he was in cell number 1 in a cell block called the Pool Hall in a prison we call the Zoo. And he learned that other POWs at the end of the building were being denied food and water as a means of coercion. And so what he did, he figured out, this is a picture I took in 1998, there's a hole in the ceiling there. There's no way to get up there, but Percy figured out how to do it. And he got up there and he took his own food that he had taken the rice and whatever solids there were and made little pellets out of them. He took that up there, he took his water jug up there and he went down there and he fed these guys every day for 2 weeks. He lived on the broth in the so-called soup. Now, this was a story that I did not know Percy at the time, but I heard this story, and this was so inspirational. He not only saved these guys, but the Vietnamese couldn't figure out how they were able to live without food and water for all this time. And so they never, to my knowledge, they never used starvation as a means of coercion, sometimes as punishment. So Percy did some amazing things. He canned their program of starvation as a means of coercion. He saved Norland Daughtry and others. And I remember he got above Norland's cell, and he was looking down there, and he said, "Hey, Norland." Well, Norland had been praying a lot. He thought God was talking directly to him, you know. Percy said, "No, it's me up here, Percy," you know, and he told him a couple of jokes and cheered him up and everything, but he dropped this food down to him, poured the water down, everything. And so you can imagine this story circulated around of what Percy had done. And this was so inspirational to the rest of us. And I think everybody said, wow, you know, if Percy can do that, he set the bar pretty high for the rest of us. And so I think it was leaders like Percy that really influenced so many people there. The TAP code, you know, it was demonstrated in the film. I won't go through that anymore, other than the fact that you leave out the letter K and you can substitute C. And the other thing that wasn't presented there is that you need to make the phone ring, so to speak. And we did that with a very American thing. And those of you, if I'm calling you up, I'm going to call up and I want you to answer. That was something the Vietnamese did not know. And so if you called up with your shaving a haircut and you did not get 2 bits back, then you shut up because you didn't want to be talking to the Vietnamese over there if they were in that empty cell. So when Fred and I were split up, I moved out to prison we call the Briar Patch, and I went back into solitary confinement. The only person that I could tap with was Howie Dunn, a Marine major, F-4 pilot. And so we spent all day with our hands handcuffed behind our back. And the punishment for communicating was very severe. 2 days of heavy punishment, 60 days in a foxhole, getting out for 10 minutes a day to use a bucket and eat 1 meal. They were very serious about preventing us from communicating, and yet we did. And so Howie was the only person that I could tap with. He was my senior officer. I looked to him for guidance. We both went through some pretty tough times, and we all shared what we did and what we said and how we reacted and all of that. And so we spent a lot of time tapping on the wall. I learned a lot about his military career and his family and education and all of this. We became really good friends. And one day I realized I didn't know what he looked like. We never got outside our cells where we could see each other. And so I asked him, I said, Howie, what do you look like anyway? He said, you know John Wayne? I said, yeah, I know John Wayne. He said, a lot like that. Okay. You know, I pictured him 6'2" at least, and broad shoulders, narrow hips, rugged good looks, and so on. And I put that mental image of him with everything else I knew about him, and I carried that with me the rest of the experience. So this was probably in 1967. And so I didn't ever run into, we moved from there. I never ran into Howie again, and never knew anybody that knew him. And so finally, right before we were to be released, they let us out into the big courtyard that I showed you in the Hanoi Hilton. And so we were all, a bunch of us out there together, and I'm talking to some friends, and this guy comes walking up to me, and he is short and bald. He was kind of rugged, good looks, and so on. And he stuck out his hand and he said, hi, I'm Howie Dunn. I said, Howie, you son of a bitch, you lied to me. And we had a great laugh about it. He said, yeah, I know, but it was such great fun knowing the image that you had of me all these years and everything. So I love to tell that story, but you know, the point of it is, the instant that he said, Howie Dunn, he went from being a complete and absolute stranger to being one of my best friends in all my life. Numbers 1 to 5. That simple communication made us friends for life. So today, you know, we have so many ways of communicating, and so many of them are so ineffective. We have to be careful. You as leaders need to think about communication. How do you communicate effectively? And so we used a very simple method, but it built a community, it built a military organization, it built a society, and a friendship that really lasted the rest of our lives. One of the things that I vowed at the very beginning, in addition to I was going to eat everything they put in front of me, was that I was going to be active. I couldn't sit around and just feel sorry for myself, that I had to fill every day, you know, with, fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. And so I've made a concerted effort to engage every day in mental activity, in physical activity, and spiritual activity. And I strove for a balance among those things. So I could tell you lots of stories about the things that we did. One thing many of us did was to memorize all the names of everybody who was there, together with their shoot down date, the airplane, service, rank, all that. And so by 1968, when the bombing stopped, I had 350 names memorized of everybody who was there. I think it was everybody. There's one name I think I left out, but I would go over that list of names every day to refresh it, to if I was with somebody else, to make corrections and to make sure that I never forgot any of those names. We did amazing things. We played, I won't go into that but because of the time, but we made clandestine deck of cards one time, and I taught everybody in our group, there were 9 of us, how to play bridge with these little cards that we made. And the Vietnamese found them, took them away, and put us in leg irons and everything, and told us we could not play cards. Well, they just took our cards and destroyed them. So we're sitting around, and I said, let's play bridge without the cards. And we did. And so this was laborious, but we did it, and it was a sense of accomplishment. We actually played a few games of bridge with nothing but our minds. And physically, we did things I never thought we could do. We had push-up contests, and my friend Irv Williams won that contest. I did 100, which was more than I had done before. That was my personal best. He did 2,250 push-ups. Sit-ups, a guy did 3,000 sit-ups. I did 6,000 deep knee bends and lost. So we did some pretty incredible things. Every Sunday we had church call. The senior officer gave the signal. CC for church call. We all would, if you were able, we faced the direction of the United States. We said the Pledge of Allegiance. We said the Lord's Prayer, if that was appropriate, in whatever service that you wanted to have. And I was thinking as we said the Pledge of Allegiance, some of those words there, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've come a long way from that. We are divisible. We are divided. We do not have liberty and justice for all. And so this pledge needs to be recited. And more than that, we need to think about how do we heal our divisions? How do we bring liberty and justice for all? Because I think we're in danger. Marty and I did not communicate for 5 years. And so when I first got a package from her, it had 4 pictures and a roll of lifesavers. I didn't care, the Vietnamese had taken everything else. I didn't care about anything except the pictures. And here's my daughter Dabney at about age 4 or so. And this was this incredible visual connection with my family. And that began something I began to really seriously think about what life was going to be like when I got home. And I wrote a poem about the 3 of us, if I can find it. Let me read one about that I wrote to Marty. And this is actually lyrics to a song. I put this to music as well. I'm not going to sing it, though. How can I describe you or what you mean to me? I cannot paint the picture with the words for you to see. My humble hands are useless to translate this perfect thing. I cannot capture sunlight or the beauty of the spring. The bitterness and sorrow of the years we spent apart have sealed the precious memory of our love within my heart. I pray that time will never break the bonds that hold us fast, but more than time or memories, I know our love will last. In the morning when I wake and find you by my side, when once again together, tears of joy I cannot hide, the music of your laughter, the magic of your face, no longer dreams but mine at last, the warmth of your embrace. How can I describe you or what you mean to me? I cannot paint the picture with the words for you to see, but I can say I love you in 1,000 different ways. Love you and adore you to the end of all my days. If I can find this, thank you. There's one more I wanted to read. Usually I'm better organized than this. Well, I can't find it. It's in the book, though. It's in the book. All of the songs and poetry that I wrote in the book. And so, I was killed in action for almost 18 months, and the video talked about that. And as I look down at that, I'm reminded, that one of the cruelest things that the Vietnamese did or did not do was to tell my family that I was there and alive. They let them remain in ignorance and uncertainty for all of that time. This was almost unforgivable. And everything else that happened to us, the way they treated us, especially the fact that they didn't have the decency to release our names to our families, and I'm not the only one, was almost unforgivable. And so I think we built up this hatred for our captors, the North Vietnamese, the communists. And this hatred became like armor, like a shield that they could never break through. And so it was useful. Right at the end, though, we were talking about what we were going to do first days or so that we were, after we were released. And of course, I'm looking at this picture of Marty and Dabney, and that's what I was planning, what was on my mind. I heard these two guys next to me talking about how they were going to get revenge, how they were going to get back at the Vietnamese for all that they had done. And I realized that this hatred was useful as it had been. I no longer needed that. I had said, once I get home, these people are never going to adversely affect my life again. And I knew if I took that hatred home with me, that they would. And so as we walked through the gates of the Hanoi Hilton, I thought for the last time, I simply turned to that building and said, I forgive you. And all of that hatred fell away, that armor fell away, and it was the most liberating thing that I have ever done. And I walked out of 2 prisons that day. And so that's the last great lesson, is forgiveness. And the thing is, you have to choose to forgive. And so these 2 lessons came together in the end. I chose to forgive. And that's what we must all do, to rid our lives of hatred, because that's one of the things that's wrong with our world today. We are filled with hatred and greed. So that was a very important lesson for me. So I have also written lots of other poetry, and so I have a book of poetry called Old Pine that's going to come out this month, actually October 17th, which you think about it is a significant date. So I am certainly willing to entertain any questions that any of you might have. Bill, if you want to help me point out questions, we have a mic here. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
If you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come around.
Good.
I was just wondering if you, when you went back to Vietnam, if you met any of your captors.
Actually, we went back to Vietnam for the first time in 1998, which was 25 years after he'd been shot down. And we went with a group of other former POWs and their wives and so on. And since then, I think I've been back 8 times to Vietnam. Marty's been back, I think, 10 times, as you saw in the video. She's been there to teach English and to work with NGOs and all of that. And so, yes, we have, and it was not any kind of catharsis or anything. It was just curiosity, I think. We did get to go to.
The question was captors. Did you see any of your former captors?
I'm sorry. These hearing aids don't work as well as they might. We did not. I did not see anybody that we had ever had any contact with before. I believe the Vietnamese wanted to isolate them or get rid of them or something, because they did not want these people who knew exactly what went on in the prisons to be able to talk to visitors, press, or anything like that. So, no, I didn't see anybody, any of those interrogators or anything. Yeah.
How did your family find out you were actually alive, sir?
Well, she found out through, it was Jim Stockdale and his wife Sybil and a naval intelligence officer who came up with a means of covert communication in letters. And so when Jim Stockdale sent out this long letter, he sent the first 40 names that he had memorized, like I did, of the POWs who were there. And I was number 40. And so that was the first information that I was actually there in POW camp. So Jim Stockdale was responsible for that. Later on, there were other information came out and so on. There was a guy there named who was a Navy seaman, Doug Hedgel, who was on the cruiser Canberra. He fell off during the night, and nobody knew he was gone until the morning. And so he floated around out there and was eventually picked up by fishermen and then turned over to the military and wound up in our prison. And so he had an incredible memory, and he was the one that memorized these names. I think he had 250 at the time and so on. And he was ordered to go home early if he was offered the opportunity. Now, the Code of Conduct says you will not accept parole, and yet he was ordered to because he had these names. He knew everything about torture and means of interrogation, camp life, and means of communication, and all of that. And so he was released early. And about 15 minutes after he landed in the United States, he was on the phone with Marty telling her that I was there and I was okay. Because I think, wasn't that the first indication you had that I was not only there, but I was okay? And so that was a great relief, yeah. Anybody
Next
else?
question.
Veterans Day is a month away. What's the best way to celebrate veterans in any organization, be it a church or something else?
Well, I think what we need to do is to inspire our young people to serve. You know, we have a tiny bit of 1% of our population serves in the military today. The Army, I know, is having trouble filling their quotas. We need dedicated people in our military because we are faced with many conflicts, many enemies, some of them big, some of them not so much. But our young people have to know that veterans are taken care of through the VA and all the other organizations and so on. And so I think that our job in Veterans Day is to show that kind of support, that if you serve, we support you, we honor you, and we'll never forget you. And that's a message that I think our young people have to inspire them to serve not only our military, but our elected officials and all of that. So.
Did you have a question?
My question actually is more for Marty. Having been told for 18 months that you had died, and then finding out you were actually in a prisoner of war, knowing what you might be going through, how did she cope with that?
Well, I think that's a question Marty could answer. I know that uncertainty is a terrible thing. I know you can describe it.
I had really talked myself into the fact that Porter had not suffered, and that death, that being a POW was a fate worse than death. And so I will say it was in many ways harder for me to come to grips with the fact that he was a prisoner of war.
Didn't you say at least he's not a POW? Yeah.
You had mentioned that our young people need to be encouraged about military service. It would seem like our public school system is not really geared up these days to talk about American exceptionalism, right. That's kind of a negative word. So how would you encourage our educational system to encourage that this is the greatest country on earth and it deserves to be served?
Well, I wish I had an answer to that question because that's a crucial one. I know when I grew up and I was being educated, it was free to talk about values and things like that are almost prohibited now in public education. And so kids are just not learning the kinds of things I think that are necessary in order to build a system of values, you know, things to believe in and live your life by. And I'm a personal advocate of national service. I think that when you graduate, when all of our young people graduate from high school or turn 18, that they owe our country 2 years of service. It can be in the military, the Peace Corps, Anyway, and I can guarantee you that exposure to a different world than you grew up in is eye-opening about what the rest of the world is like. You know, people that go in the Peace Corps and they deal in these poor countries and they're helping people with clean water and sanitation and all of this, you know, they come back different people. And I know from my own experience going right from high school into college, I was interested in a social life, you know, more than an education. But when I came back from Vietnam and I went back to graduate school, I won't tell you what my GPA was when I graduated from Davidson, but it was not great. But in graduate school, I had a 4.0 average because I had a very, very different attitude about education. And so I think if you had that 2-year experience for every young person in the country, serving in some way, learning how to brush your teeth and balance how to take care of money, how to do basic things you used to learn in home economics and shop and all those things that most of us learned, you know, because so many kids are not learning this at home or in school or anywhere else. And so they're falling through the cracks and they don't know how to live their lives. You know, so I think that 2 years of public service would make a huge difference. I'm pessimistic. I don't think this would ever happen because the people that would have to make it happen are, well, let me not say any more about that. Yeah.
Next question.
One more.
One question. I'd just like to know, while you were captured, did our Navy take care of your family?
Oh my God, yes, they did. The Navy especially. Marty was so well cared for, especially after they found out, you know, that I was a prisoner of war, so on. So yes, the Navy has bent over backwards in when we came home, we had so many opportunities to catch up on what we had missed. Matter of fact, the Reader's Digest came out with a special edition called While You Were Gone. And it was about the major events that had happened during that 8-year period that we were gone. So the Navy was excellent. They continue to be excellent. I'm really proud of being in the United States Navy and the other naval service as well. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it very much. Yes, sir.
Very inspirational.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Porter and Marty, for that inspirational presentation. I think it's an important reminder that service to this country can sometimes mean tough challenges, and as you have heard, what can be done to overcome some of those challenges. So thank you again for that presentation. We have 4 boxes of Commander Halliburton's book that you'll be able to find all his poetry in there. Reflections on Captivity for sale out in our Welcome Center. They cost $20 a book, cash or check. Proceeds from the sale go to the Semper Fi and America's Fund. It's the charity selected by the Halliburtons to receive donations and proceeds from the book sales. We don't want to send any books back to the publisher. So please break out your Andy Jacksons, consider holiday gifts, or a gift to someone who needs a boost during tough times. The Semper Fi and America's Fund table in the back is also accepting direct donations to help their organizations support wounded veterans and their families. We have 9, well, actually not quite, but several veteran support organizations represented in the back. Please take time to visit with them, with these organizations, whether you're a veteran or not. You may someday be in a position to make a recommendation to someone who could benefit from these organizations. You also notice a large vehicle that was parked out in front of the church, the Voices of Freedom Project. They're also represented with a table back there. This organization captures the oral histories of veterans and their families, and I encourage folks to stop by, make an appointment, or share a story or two about your service, particularly as we're getting older and some of these oral stories get lost. This is a very important project. And finally, if you're looking for a fun outing for your children, grandchildren, or neighbors, please come back here next Saturday from 12 to 4 for an annual fall festival. There'll be an inflatable obstacle course, bouncy houses, face painting, pony rides, and hot dogs. So what else could you want? 12 to 4. On behalf of the Fawn Lake Veterans Group, one of the sponsors for this event, thank you all for coming today. Your presence underscores the value you place in Commander Halliburton's story, which is an important part of U.S. history. And now the word that many of you have heard and cherished in your service time, dismissed. Commander Halliburton will be at the front table. We have books that are already pre-signed, but you can meet with him. But again, thank you.